but I'm pretty silly. So, my apologies, I guess, in advance. Welcome, everyone, tonight. I'm really happy that you're all here. You have already maybe heard a few times about our community, but we're just a group of people that are trying to love each other and love God as best we can, but we are by no means perfect, okay? But we do believe that Jesus is the Son of God and that he's here tonight and that he is perfect. So that's really good news. And one of the great things about Jesus, being here and being perfect is that he can help us love each other and help us love God better. And for me, this is the best news ever because I'll share a little bit about who I am tonight, not full background. I guess you guys probably get to know me throughout the semester. But yeah, on that side note of, Jesus really helping us, I'm really thankful for that because I can stop at any moment in my day and just be like, hey, God, not feeling the best. I'm really cranky. I'm having a bad attitude about this. Will you help me out? And even when I have the best intentions, sometimes I will do something that I mean to do something good, and then the complete opposite happens. And I don't know if anyone else is susceptible to this, to intending to do something and then the complete opposite happens. Anybody? Or I maybe am just alone. Yeah. But yeah, I've always been like this. I was a little girl and I just said whatever was on my mind. So my mom took me to a garage sale once, and there was this older lady that was doing the garage sale. She was really old, okay? And her, really bad. Okay, so her neck was really saggy, and I walked right up to her. I'm like, what's wrong with your face? And my mom was like, oh my gosh, Jenny. And so, of course, I'm a kid, and kids say things, right? But somehow this has followed me into adulthood. So I, to say nice things and be nice, but I don't know, you just get in situations sometimes I'm just, out of all the people that we should be nice to, my mom is one of the people I'm I should be the nicest to, but I'm the worst to. We were on the phone the other day and she forgot that I had told her something. I'm like, Mom, what the heck? And she's like, sorry, I woke up at 4:30. And I was like, I just you're making excuses. Stop it. And I'm like, why did I say that? I'm just being mean. And so whatever. All of that to say, I'm personally really thankful for Jesus in my life and that he can help me at any moment. And most of that is silly, except for the point that I can draw from these stories that we as humans make a lot of mistakes. Is anyone else here susceptible to making mistakes? Anybody? Oh, see this one, yes. All right. Yeah, okay. It's not really a shock to any of us that we live in a world full of people that make mistakes. Look around you. Read the news. We by no means live in a perfect world, which is probably something that most people that you talk to on a day-to-day basis agree on. And this isn't really something that I thought about personally until I moved to college. I was pretty fortunate to grow up in a home where I had two loving parents and I had two siblings who were mostly loving. They actually weren't super loving to me as a child. I'm the youngest. Anyone else here the youngest? Yeah, okay, we're meeting after. Just kidding. But yeah, it's a super special place in a family. But no, they would pull pranks on me all the time, and they knew that I hated snakes. And we had this bathroom in the center of our house that had no windows. And so one day they decided to pick me up, put me in the bathroom, and then chuck a fake snake in there. And then of course the light is on the outside of the bathroom. And so then they're flickering the light and can't even really tell the story without doing it. But yeah, so our world isn't perfect, our siblings aren't perfect, we're not perfect. But anyways, I really did have a pretty innocent childhood, other than the trauma from my siblings. But I didn't really think about the trouble that I would face later in life, or you might even call it the darkness in the world that we live in, until I came to college. So I came to UMD, like many of you, when I was 18. I'm not 18 anymore. I know it's a surprise. But yeah, I was really upbeat about life. And I was like, yeah, like I'm gonna meet all these new friends. And I just felt like I didn't really know what I was gonna do, but I felt a lot of promises for my future. And there's nothing wrong with that. It was great. And things were going well. But then kind of out of nowhere, life started getting like pretty challenging. I actually, like, pretty soon after coming to college, I ended up going to a house party one night. Someone had invited me, like, in my dorm or something, and so I go to this house party, and it just, like, long story short, it was just, like, awful. And I went with this group of people who I kind of thought were my friends, and by the end of the night, they didn't really end up being, like, the people I thought they were, and, like, I got super hurt, and I think they got super hurt, and it was just, like, really awful. So there was that. And then like a month into school, I get this call from a friend from back home, and he tells me his mom has died of brain cancer. And it's like a really close friend. So I'm like, okay, like pause college, like go home, like go through this like whole really like tragic thing with my friend. And then, of course, my class load started getting like not as exciting as when I first started. You know, at first it was like, oh, cool, I'm taking like intro to psychology, this is gonna be great. And then it's like not as fun, like second month of taking the class. I don't know. Anyways, it started just getting like a little bit more heavy. Like you think 18 credits isn't so much, and then all of a sudden it kind of is. So there's all these like outside circumstances that were happening or becoming pretty challenging. But then there was like these inward things that were happening in my life. Like I started experiencing like just being really like sad and unmotivated, and I didn't really care about much, and I didn't really want to leave my dorm room, and I didn't even really understand what was happening to me. And I later was like, oh, I'm like suffering from depression. And then a little while later, I start to pick up on this vibe all around campus of like stress, and I realized I'm like, I think it's cool to be stressed. Because we sort of live in this society where it's like you got to be more stressed than the person next to you. Like you have to have less sleep and work harder and like be super stressed. And before I knew it, I was waking up every morning super anxious. And so it was a lot. Like I was struggling. It wasn't even that far after school had started. I was away from home. I missed my family. I wasn't afraid to admit it. And life like wasn't as straightforward anymore as I thought that it would be. And so these are all like big questions I had to answer. And suddenly they seemed more daunting than when I first came to school. Like, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? And how do I actually like build and keep like good friendships instead of ones that weren't that great? Or how do you effectively and regularly use a public bathroom on your floor with like a whole bunch of people? Like, how do you do that? And so I was experiencing, these are big questions, and I was experiencing like a lot of darkness. It felt really heavy. And I don't even have all the answers to these questions now. But I do want to look at the Bible tonight, and we're going to look specifically at the Gospel of John. And we believe here at Chi Alpha that the Bible is the inspired Word of God, and that it is a guide for us to walk out our faith in Jesus. And if you're unfamiliar with the Bible, it is full of people just like you and me that make a ton of mistakes. And they reach out to God, and He saves them over and over and over again. So I personally find a lot of comfort in the Bible. And perhaps you would too. I don't know. So at our large group service this fall, we're actually going to keep going through the Gospel of John together. And so I'm excited about like doing some of it every week. And I encourage you, I think this is already mentioned, but if you're interested to and like want to keep coming, we're going to read through a chapter a week. And so this week, we're going to look at chapter 1. Yes. Thank you. All right. We're actually going to look at chapter 1 next week too. So spoiler alert. And so yeah, this week, if you want to, do some homework, not that you guys have any, but we're going to read the first chapter of John. So if you want to do that when you guys go home. So I've been talking a lot, And I really love to break it up. So I'm going to invite our student president up, and she's going to read some scripture for us. Kirli, where are you? There you are. We didn't talk about this end.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it.
Thanks. Okay, you can just wait here. So, we're reading right here this introduction to the book of John. And it's this introduction that is a little bit similar to another book in the Bible. If anybody is familiar with the very first book, it's very similar to Genesis. And actually, something I didn't realize when I read this, when I've been studying it recently, is that it's written in a very poetic way. And so that's just like really an interesting fact about the way that this is written. But it's this introduction to this hymn, to this word, and this hymn is a man named Jesus. And these scriptures are believed to be written by one of Jesus' followers, a man named John. Yes. And he's writing some pretty bold statements. But what's cool is that we believe that he's writing these statements from firsthand experience. He was one of Jesus' followers. And so he's claiming here that Jesus is God, and he was with God when everything was created, and through him all things were made. And not only that, but in him is life. And that in this life is the light of all mankind. So these are some pretty interesting statements, but we're going to keep reading. We're going to skip a couple of verses because he goes off to something else, but we're going to keep on this vein of this description of Jesus being light and life. So,
the true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth.
Mm-hmm. All right, so Jesus has made God known. So this is a lot, and honestly, it's I'll just read the first few verses of John. It's actually a lot to unpack. And so if you are at all intrigued or curious, I encourage you, please go home, read it, ask questions, write them down. But I want to focus on a few things that are actually from the first 4 verses. John is describing, like I already said, Jesus as being someone who was with God in the beginning. And so from that, we can learn I want to say a simple point, but it's really far from simple. It's pretty miraculous and crazy. But we learn that he is divine, right? We can conclude that he is divine. And drawing from that point, we learn that he himself is God. In the very first verse, it says, "In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God." And at the very end, it says, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us." And so he is God in the flesh, but not only that, we read that in him is life, and that he is the light of all mankind. So these are some pretty amazing things. God has come into the world. Jesus is showing us who God is. I don't know, I think about that and I'm kind of racks my brain a little bit. He's showing us who God really is. He's revealing this unseen God. And he's saying that he's full of life, he's full of light, he's full of grace and truth. And these are all really good things. I asked someone for this. I was what's the all good things? But it's Olaf. He's all good things, all good things. Okay, those are really great things. And for me personally, I read these first verses, and what really stands out to me is that there's this amazing news that Jesus is showing us God, and that he's life, and that he's the light of all mankind. And so I think back to my story, and what I was sharing with you and how I was like super crushed by all that was going on. Like I didn't even make it that far into freshman year and I was just like, I don't know if I can keep going. But there was like all of this weight that was on me and like all this like heaviness and darkness. Like there was death that happened and there was disappointment with relationships and there was like all these other like almost failed expectations that I had. And so as I'm sharing my story, I want to ask you guys some questions too, and for you to think about this as well. So if any of you are here tonight in this room, if you have experienced, or maybe you currently are experiencing, some darkness that we so often face like in our life with circumstances, or maybe even inwardly. So maybe it's with friendships or your family or relationships. Maybe you have lost a loved one recently. Maybe college isn't what you thought. Maybe it's like the new year, like you're coming back and that's been a little bit of a disappointment. And I don't know, maybe you are having a great time so far, but there's also these like sort of hidden fears in your life that you don't really want to share with anyone. And I know also that like for all of us in this room, we probably all have stories of some sort of like trial and struggle that we faced during COVID. So it's like if you're a freshman this year, there was like probably a good chunk of your high school was like different than what you expected. Or if you're a senior, it's like a good chunk of your college. It's like all of these things that sort of flipped upside down that were unexpected. So whatever it is in your life tonight, I think most of us, if we all, like sat down for coffee, we could probably all come up with some sort of trial or like darkness that we faced. And so what is that for you? I'm just asking you guys to think for a moment. What is that for you tonight? What is it that's on your mind or that you're facing? Maybe it doesn't have to be super heavy, but it's something that's sort of consuming your thoughts or maybe a worry. So for me, I was sharing what it was like for me as a student. And there was this one day that I was actually invited to a Chi Alpha service. And I decided to take a chance. Honestly, I didn't really know what I was walking into. I had never heard of campus ministry. Had definitely never heard of something called Chi Alpha. And it can be scary for many of us. I just want to say, walking into a new place. So thanks guys for coming. But yeah, so I went to my first Chi Alpha service and it was awesome. Everyone was super friendly, and this is my experience. And a lot of the people that I met seemed like they actually cared. I'm like, oh, this is nice. Asking me questions, caring about where I'm from. And I was actually, I think one of the first times that I went, I don't quite remember, but I had a girl ask if she's like, hey, do you want to get coffee sometime between classes? And so we sit down, had never really talked to this girl, and I start sharing all this stuff that was happening, and I think she was like, whoa, that's a lot. But she was also such a kind listening ear, and all of a sudden, all that darkness that I was sort of carrying around with me, it didn't feel so heavy anymore. Not because it was not any better, but just because just to have know someone that cared and was wanted to care for me during this difficult time. It helped me realize I know now that part of this light that Jesus offers in his life is often through people. Relationships can be really damaging, they can be really harmful, but they can also be extremely healing. And I think that in my life I've found a lot of relationships that have been really healing. And I mean, spoiler alert, we weren't really created to walk this life alone. And community is this intentional thing from God. So I think that this shows a big part of this light and life that he brings to us. But along with community, I shared that I had attended some events and some large group services with Chi Alpha. But at the time, there was this weekly prayer meeting. And so I go to this prayer night, and I honestly never experienced anything like it. But we would sit on the floor and we'd pray. And I was like, okay, I've never done this before. And sometimes we'd sit with music, sometimes there would be silence, and we would ask God to speak to us. And it was crazy. Honestly, it was pretty uncomfortable, if I'm being honest. And I'd sit there sometimes and I'd think like, how did I get here? Like, I just like got in someone's car and now I'm in this house and now we're sitting on the floor in silence. Like, what's going on? And it was uncomfortable and it was weird until there was this one night where I'm sitting there with my eyes closed and all of a sudden something like came over me. And it was like this presence or like this peace. And I know now that that was the presence of God, but at the time, it honestly, I don't know if some people have ever, like, if you've heard this before, but sometimes people say that if you feel the presence of God, sometimes it's like a warm hug. So that's like kind of what it felt like. And I realized that I was like encountering God in that moment, like personally. And I had this like strong knowing that he saw me and like all that I was facing and that he cared and that he was with me. And I wasn't alone in all the things that I was like facing. And it didn't like change the fact that a lot of it was hard, but I knew then that he was like with me in it all. And I also had all of these like loving people by my side too. Because my faith at that point had really just been like what I was told in church or like what I was told at a meeting and trying to like not do certain things or like live my life a certain way because I was told that was like what I was supposed to do. But at that moment, it changed from that to being something that I was like actually experiencing. And I can't like make it up. I can't like, I know that it was real and it was really personal to me. And no one was teaching me anything. No one was telling me anything. I was just like encountering God. And that is what changed my whole life. Like that he filled me with himself. And that though life was still challenging, like I had so much more hope for where things were going. And there was light in all the darkness. And the darkness wasn't winning anymore.